Gilbert. Alright guys, I'm going to show you how to create a Sega themed logo, animated, so like the old Sega games where it would open up and say Sega. I sort of replicated that so you can use that in any sort of logo you want to make, be it for a personal name or a business or a brand or whatever. You can follow these steps and make that same effect for your own content, which could be a fun little way of making an intro for temporary use or breaking up your stuff in some way. Anyway, let's get to it. The first step you need to do is create a brand new document. You want to make them 3840 wide, and you want to make it 2160 tall. That's the size of 4K. So we're going to use this video in 4K. You could arguably make it larger because you can't really make anything too large, but that's the size I'm going to use it for, so that's all I really need or want. Resolution is going to be 300 pixels per inch. We got a white background, 8-bit RGB color. Anyway, let's create it. Alright, the first thing I want to do is I want to bring up that Sega video I just had going. For reference, I'm going to take a couple of image samples using my snipping tool on my computer. Make a new selection. I'm going to just sort of select this whole screen. Control C is going to copy that back into Photoshop. I'm going to make a new layer. And Control V. I'll make it the size of my whole frame, just so that way we can get our sizing similar. Just like that. That's just one color sample that we need though, because if you notice, we got a couple of different colors going on. We have this dark royal blue, but if you go back a little bit, you got this lighter blue, which only lasts for a few frames. Only lasts for about 3 frames. And then right before that is a sort of a cyan, and that lasts for 1 frame. And before that is another cyan, but it looks like it's just a lighter cyan, so maybe a lower opacity on the same color. And that lasts for 3 frames itself. There's a blank frame, and then there's our scan through of our effect. And the effect is the word I use for this little 5-bar array we have here. If you notice, we've got 5 bars going across: a light, a medium, a dark, a medium, and a light. So it goes light, medium, dark, medium, light. And it goes in that order for 5 bars at a constant rate. Every time the frame changes, the 5 bars, it remains 5 bars, and those 5 bars simply move. So we're going to copy this effect of the 5 bars, scanning the word, which will be my name. It's going to fade out to white. We're going to fade in with a light opacity, go into a darker opacity cyan, go into a light blue, into a dark blue, and that's when you're going to hear Sega, which will be my name. And we're going to try to replicate this as close as possible. So right now we've got one Sega image in for color. We also have a light blue, so we're going to grab this light blue, doing the exact same thing with the snipping tool. I'm going to grab the whole screen, Control copy, new layer, paste it, Control T to change its size, make it the same size as our frame. That's our lighter blue. We'll call this dark blue reference. We'll call this light blue reference. I like to name all my layers because I tend to have a lot of layers at the end of my projects. Sometimes I'll have dozens of layers, and it's nice to just have them all named so I know exactly what they are without having to try to figure them out later on. We change the frame again, we see our darker cyan. And these are just going to be used to reference the exact color that's being used, as well as the spacing between the letters, sort of the overall vibe of the letters that you feel. We've got a white layer there, but if you notice, this isn't pure white. We've got a white here. It's actually sort of an off-white. It's like a very, very, very slight gray. And we've got a gradient coming in there from the bottom. So we're going to have to make our name in each of these colors. So it doesn't really matter what color we start with, because we're going to have to make it in all the colors. And once we make it in one color, the other ones are easy. We just got to change the colors and opacities. So I'm actually going to start just with blue, the darkest blue, just because that's like the main color that occupies about 70 frames of the entire sequence. So I consider it to be the main color. You'll learn that if you're going to start with one of the cyans, don't start with the lighter one. Start with the darker one, because you can actually just lower the opacity of the darker one to get the same effect of the lighter one with a white background on the back. So you just lower that, and now you got a lighter cyan. So let's start with blue. We'll get to that later. And now we're going to make a new layer. We're going to sample this blue by just pushing I on your keyboard. That's going to bring out the eyedropper, and just sample right in the middle of a letter. Just get that, grab that blue, and Alt backspace is going to fill our layer with that foreground color. Layer mask it out, and invert the layer mask to turn it off. Unfortunately, because my name has a G in it, and we already have been given a G from Sega, so we're going to use this G as our G. And I'm going to cut it out using the polygonal lasso tool. I'm selecting my lasso, and I'm making sure it's the polygonal lasso tool, so that way we can just make sharp edges. And we can make them rather easy. I like to get a nice full-size letter. I hold Shift to go straight, either left, right, down, or up. If you hold Shift on your keyboard, it keeps you locked into variances of 45 degrees. So you got 90 degrees, you got 45 degrees, 0 degrees, 180 degrees, 360 degrees, 270 degrees, and so forth. So hold Shift to go a hard left, so that way you don't have to worry about keeping your mouse steady. Go to about where it ends. I'm going to let go of my Shift key for this curve, and I'm going to grab the curve sort of as best as I can, but I'm not going to worry too much about exact details of the curve. I'm just going to sort of go where I feel is right, because the exact curvature is not going to matter later on, as you'll see. I'm going to hold Shift as I go straight down. Again, letting go of Shift for the curve, holding Shift for the straight. Now that I've cut that shape out, I'm going to hold Alt backspace on my layer mask with white in my foreground. If you don't have white in your foreground, just hit D on your keyboard for default, and X will switch your foreground and background colors. So make sure white's in your foreground, and then hold Alt backspace on your layer mask is going to fill that in. So if I select just this layer by holding Alt on my keyboard and clicking, that's what I selected, and that's what I've got now. I've got this blue G. If I put my white there, this is where I'm at to start. But now I need the rest of the G, so I'm just going to do the exact same thing. Again, Alt backspace with white in my foreground is going to fill that in. And now that's what I'm left with, is my G. Since right now all I have visible is this one layer, I'm going to make a new layer by holding Shift Control Alt and pushing N on my keyboard will give me a brand new layer. And then while I'm still holding Shift Control and Alt, I'm going to push E. It's going to copy all visible. So now if I turn off this, my layer 1 here, I'm still left with my G. I can move my G around. So I'm going to move that over here right now because G's at the beginning. Now to make I is going to be even easier because since I have this G, I can just sample straight from it. And I'm not going to grab any curvature, I'm just going to grab this straight sample here. Notice how all of my edges here are straight. In my selection, I'm going to hold Control and push J. It's going to give me a brand new layer from that selection. It's going to copy it. And then Control T so I can move that. And this is what I'm left with. And it's short, but it's all a solid color blue. So if I take that little shorty and hold Shift on my keyboard and stretch it down and up, now I'm left with an I. And this is where I'm going to turn my reference photo back on. And I'm going to move it so I can see my proper spacing. I'm going to see how far Sega spaced their letters, and that's how far I'm going to space mine. And there we go, we have GI. And to make L is going to be just as easy. I'm actually going to grab all the way up to the curvature here. I'm going to go this way. And I'm taking this top area, this top curve, that's going to be my L. So I'm going to Control J to make a new layer. I'm going to move it up here and name it L. Control T to move it. And if you notice, it's upside down. So what we need to do here is right click while we're still in the transform dialog. And we're going to flip vertical, because that's going to make a vertical mirror image here of our L. Since we grabbed this straight from G, we already know it's the right width. We already know it's going to be the same width as G because we grabbed it straight from G. Now we just have to make it the correct height. And to do that, we can quickly, selecting the I layer, Control J to copy that, Control T to move it, and we can move it right over top L here by pushing M, making a marquee tool. We can shave this entirely off, backspace. And now we have L. And we know it's already the exact same size, but we just want to turn our reference on to make sure that our spacing is correct. Looks like good spacing to me. I decided to speed up here when we got to the rest of the letters, just to save you guys. You know, you got the picture. I made my B there by flipping the Sega upside down and using the upside down E. Then I made an E. I made the R derived from the B that I had already made. And then I made a T by using the L. I made the L upside down and then mirrored it horizontally and made a T. But I thought I'd save you guys the long and the short. I grouped every letter together so that way I could move them all in unison and then center the entire picture and make sure that my letters were entirely centered. I added on the white background and the gradient, and that gave me my dark blue finished product there. But that's only one frame that we've got there. That's only one of the few that we've got to do.
Control V.
There I added in the cyan version of the Sega sample, so that way I could color sample it while using the eyedropper tool, or I on the keyboard. And then in order to do this effect, I copied my group of letters into a new group. I selected that group. I went down to FX. I clicked the FX tab, and then I went to color overlay. And then from color overlay, I clicked the color selector, and I set the color to my foreground color here, which was cyan. And that turned all my letters to my desired end goal. And then I exported this picture as well. So now I've exported the blue version of the completed letters, and now I'm exporting the cyan version. This is a full opacity cyan version. The next one's going to be a 15% cyan version. There's 2 frames complete. And then I needed a lighter blue frame as well. I have a dark blue, I've got a light blue, I needed a cyan, and a cyan at 15% opacity. Here we created a completely new document, and we decided to make the pixels 55 wide and then 2160 tall. 55 wide is going to be the width of 1 bar for our effect. Our effect is going to be 5 bars wide, 1 dark in the middle, and then as you go out, it's going to be a little bit lighter and then lightest on the outside, for a total of 5 bars. Each bar is going to be 55 pixels wide, and that was decided because the frame is 3840 pixels wide entirely, and then we decided that there was a total of 70 bars because there's 7 letters in my name, and then each letter needs to have 10 bars as per the original Sega reference. Each letter in Sega and the effect had 10 bars entirely across. So I wanted to make sure there was 10 bars across each letter. So 7 letters, 10 bars was 70 bars total. And the frame entirely is 3840 wide, which my name's doesn't fill the entire frame, but it gets really close. So I counted it. And that left me with about 55 pixels wide per bar. So I needed to make a brand new document that was 55 pixels wide and 2160 tall, so that way I can create my desired effect. Once I made the brand new document in white, I sampled the color that I was looking for. I just needed something light. I just needed 3 degrees of color here, really. They don't need to be entire entirely accurate to any degree, because we're just using them to make a selection on a curves layer in a moment here. We just need 3 varying degrees of color, so that way we have differentiation. So we can use the magic wand tool and just make quick selections. So I'm sort of just setting out the bars, so that way I can use the magic wand tool and make a curves layer, and then raise my curves layer to make a lighter stripe there on the letter, and then next to it will be a slightly darker stripe, and then the darkest stripe, and then the same effect but mirrored. I'm using the magic wand tool to quickly select the entire colored area. It's very easy because we're using solid colors and we're using very sharp lines. The magic wand tool is very effective. Once I made the effect on the one side, because it's the same exact effect on the left as the right, I just copied my curves layers because I wanted it to be the exact same. So I called it light, medium, and dark, and then I just copied my light and it turned into light copy. I copied my medium, turned into medium copy, and then I just moved them. I moved the effects to the exact place where they need to be based on where the bars were. That's another reason why I wanted the 3 varying colors of bars, so that way Photoshop can recognize them as different and then easily just lock them into place when I go to place the layers. Photoshop does a good job at locking those things into place when there's an obvious differentiation between layers. So now I've got light, medium, dark, medium, light. And that's our effect. It's 5 bars long, just like on the Sega reference. So now that we have the gradient effect, we also need to make sort of like a window, sort of like a shutter on a camera, where the shutters are white and there's a small window of a gap, which is going to allow you to peep through and see the effect and see the letters behind. So I'll explain that here. We made a new layer. I filled it with white. I put a layer mask and inverted it. So now we've got a black layer mask, so the white is all gone. And then I took my marquee tool and I grabbed a selection. And I'm going to modify that selection so that way it backs right up to the pixel of where the effect begins. I'm going to move my marquee tool by right-clicking it and selecting Transform Selection. And that gives me a dialog where I can hold Shift and grab the edge and stretch it exactly to where I need. I zoomed in a good amount so that way the effect is exactly to the pixel where I need to be. And then once I grabbed it, I selected my layer mask and I filled in that selection with white. So that way the white from my layer 9 here is showing in that area where I just made my layer mask white. And that's on one side here of my effect. So now I've got to do the exact same thing on the other side. I've got to select everything and I've got to zoom in and then transform my selection and bring it up to the pixel of where I want the white to be. So now I've created my shutter effect. I've got my shutters there by making my layer mask white on the white layer on top of everything else. Because this layer is on top of everything, it's going to cover everything. And all you're going to be able to see is the little tiny space in black that's available there via the layer mask. Everything else is masked out in white. And now I've just got to move that layer down into the gradient effect folder so that way it will move in unison with the effect. I need to move my white layer to the extremes. I need to move it all the way to the right and all the way to the left to fill in all other white, because Photoshop's only going to fill in the areas that you select. So you need to go ahead and make sure you select ample space to be filled in there with white. So that way, no matter how far you move the effect to the extremes, the effect is still there. But you still want to leave your window and you want to leave it the correct size that you've made it. I made a mistake here by moving my window without my effect, so now I need to go back and recalibrate. It's not a big deal, it didn't take a long time, but it's still an extra step. Here I went to the extremes. I just selected a brush, made it very hard, and I just made it really large and just dragged it across. I didn't feel like I could use the marquee or I could use a lasso. I just used the brush really fast. That's just where my mind was at. Now my window moves, I just got to calibrate it. Now that it's calibrated, I put it into the gradient effect folder. And then now when I transform the gradient effect folder, I will transform everything, including the white window and the entire gradient effect. And it'll all move together. And it just slides right across. I can slide it right across all of my letters. And you kind of just see the letters flash before you as if like it was a shutter on a camera, or I don't know, you were like passing like by a window or something. Each bar is 55 pixels wide and there's 5 bars. So that makes 275 pixels wide for my window. I'm trying to figure out how I'm gonna make my movements here with my effect. So that way, when I go across 30 frames, it makes sense. I wanna cover the entire name in 30 frames and I wanna do it in an even fashion that makes sense. So that way when it plays, it goes very smoothly and there's no jumping or too big of a a jump, something like that. So I want to do the math precisely, and in order to do that, I decided to take 3840, which is the width of the entire frame, and I decided to divide that by 55. I got 69.8, which is about 70. So I figured, okay, there's about 70 movements here, and if there's 70 movements and I use 2 bars, which is what Sega used to introduce the effect, they started off with 2 bars. If I started off with 2 bars and then added in another 2 bars on the next frame, which is also what Sega did, then I would have about 35 movements across the entire frame. I started off with completely white frame, and then I'll put in 2 bars, and then 4 bars will be visible, and then if there were more bars, it would be 6, but now it's all 5 plus a white space, and then the effect is going to move across 2 bars at a time. I found when I was moving across the 3840 pixel width document here that I was moving right about 0.367 inch each time, and I tested that when I first introduced my first 2 bars. I moved until to the pixel my next 2 bars were in line, and it was 0.367, and then I did it in the other direction as well. I did it left to see when the bars disappeared, and I got 0.367, so I decided that 0.367 was how far I was going to move each new photo. All right, and now I'm opening up Premiere Pro to put all of these images just onto a timeline. I've got now my 35 frames of the effect, and then I've got my other frames of the light cyan, the dark cyan, the light blue, the dark blue. I've got my all white with the gradient background. I also made an all white frame in general, which I like, just totally white, which I thought I might need or use or whatever, but I didn't need it, so that was unnecessary. But I've got an all white with the gradient, which was necessary because that's an actual frame in the end product. I grabbed all my frames from the white all the way through the effect, and I made them 2 frames long, and then I just ripple deleted because they're all going to be 2 frames long. I had to move my light cyan, comes after the effect, and that was to be 3 frames long as well. The darker cyan was only 1 frame. The darker cyan only occupied 1 frame on the reference, on the Sega reference. The light blue occupied 3 frames. The dark blue occupied 70 frames, which is 2 seconds and 10 frames. And then the dark blue also fades out at the end. For 12 frames, there's a fade out. I just copied the dark blue, I made it 12 frames long. I went to the effect controls, and I started the opacity using keyframes at 100% at the beginning of the frame, and then by the end of the frame, I bumped it down to 0%. So it goes from 100% to 0% over the course of 12 frames, and that's our fade out. I moved that up so that way I can put a white layer beneath it. I just copied the same white layer that I had used, that I had already had in here, and I made it the same length. And now that it's over the white layer, it looks like it's still white in the background. And there we go. We've got my whole frames, 2 frames each leading up into the final Gilbert. Now I just need to add audio. And the original Sega, in the original Sega animation, it's completely silent up until you hear the 8-bit Sega voice come out there at the end. Didn't really like the silent lead up, so I just took some sound effects I've got on my computer. I added some violins, like silent, like quietly at the beginning, leading up, just to kind of draw people in with audio, give it sort of a 2021 spin. So it's got the violins, and then it's got my voice doing the Sega tune, but to my name. And then as I'm saying that, there's also like another kind of like robotic sounding like lead up, and that robotic sound carries on to the end of the fade out, whereas the voice ends before the fade out. So the robotic sound kind of lasts there to the end. I just liked it for myself, for my own use. I could have left it out and left it silent up until the voice, but I just wanted to add some pizzazz to my own. I took a voice clip of just myself saying Sega over a microphone. I tried it in multiple different ways, and I just heard one version that I felt sounded true to the original, and I just rolled with it. Once I found my audio clip, I just cut it out. I copied it. I brought it to where I wanted it to be, and made it the right length that I wanted it to be. I wanted to make sure it was the right, speed and cadence that I needed it to be, and then I added in my sound effects. Gilbert. Hey guys, if you're still here, wow, holy smokes, thanks for watching. That was quite the project, much longer than I expected it to be. Real time with the learning curve, the stuff that I had to learn along the way. It took me about 3-ish hours. I think that if I were to recreate it and just do it again with what I know now, I'd do it much faster. I don't know, about an hour or whatnot, but never like tested myself in that kind of way, but that was fun. Thanks a lot for watching. If you liked it, I'd really appreciate it if you liked the video or subscribe to the channel. I plan on making more like this, and I'll see you soon. Thanks.